In the quiet town of Willow Creek, a house stands abandoned, its windows shattered, its paint peeling, and a silence so thick it almost suffocates. For decades, neighbors whisper about the strange shadows moving behind curtains and the faint sounds of laughter in the dead of night. Rumors speak of a family that vanished without a trace, leaving behind locked doors, mysterious journals, and a chilling diary filled with cryptic warnings. Visitors who dared enter claimed they felt eyes watching them, furniture moving on its own, and cold drafts brushing their skin when no windows were open. Tonight, we reveal the untold secrets of this house, stories of hidden rooms, ghastly apparitions, and the unexplained phenomenon that has terrified generations. Disclaimer: the following story is a work of fiction, crafted for entertainment. Any resemblance to real events or people is purely coincidental. Chapter 1. The House That Whispers. Welcome back. In the heart of Willow Creek, tucked behind overgrown hedges and a rusted gate, stood the Morgan House, an imposing structure that seemed to breathe with its own dark energy. Locals often crossed the street rather than walk past it, muttering about the strange sounds that drifted from inside, the soft creak of a rocking chair, footsteps echoing through empty hallways, and whispers that seemed almost human but never carried words. For years, the house had been empty, its walls holding secrets no one dared uncover. The house had belonged to the Morgans, a family that vanished one cold October night decades ago. Their belongings remained: an untouched breakfast plate on the dining table, coats hung neatly in the hall, and a child's toy doll staring blankly at the door. Visitors who braved the house reported sudden chills, inexplicable noises, and the feeling of being watched, even when alone. Some claimed shadows moved against the light, and doors opened or closed on their own. Others swore they heard laughter, soft, mocking, almost inviting. I first approached the house under the pretense of research, but even standing on the cracked porch, I felt a strange unease. The air was heavier here, almost thick, pressing against my skin. As I peered through the broken windows, the faded wallpaper and splintered floorboards told a story of a family frozen in time, trapped in a place that refused to release them. On the mantel, a journal sat upright, as though someone had left it deliberately for me to find. Inside were cryptic notes, warnings scrawled in uneven handwriting, sketches of shadowy figures, and words like, "They watch, they wait." Even now, as I recount these events, I can't shake the feeling that the house itself is alive, a silent witness to horrors that no one outside its walls can imagine. And tonight, we begin to uncover them. Before we continue, a quick note. This channel is not for the faint-hearted. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of true mystery seekers. And tell me in the comments, what UK town are you watching from? Are you brave enough to face a story like this from your own backyard? Next, we discover the first night a stranger dared to sleep in the Morgan house, and what woke him at midnight. Chapter 2. The Midnight Visitor. The first time anyone dared spend a night inside the Morgan house was nearly a decade after the family vanished. Alex Harper, a young urban explorer, arrived just as dusk fell, armed with a flashlight and a journal, hoping to document the house's secrets. The air around the house seemed colder than the evening outside, carrying a faint, metallic scent, like old blood mixed with dust. Every step across the porch creaked beneath his feet, and the front door groaned as he pushed it open, revealing the decaying interior. Inside, the house seemed almost expectant. The furniture lay in its decades-old positions, but shadows clung to the corners as if hiding from the light. Alex set up a small camp in the living room, laying out a sleeping bag near the fireplace. He flicked on his camera, hoping to capture something unseen. Hours passed uneventfully, yet the silence pressed on him, dense and heavy, like a living thing. Then, at precisely midnight, it began. A low whisper, almost imperceptible, threading through the walls. At first, Alex dismissed it as the wind, but soon the whispers grew louder, forming words that seemed to echo in his mind rather than his ears. "You shouldn't be here. Go." A shadow moved in the hallway, flickering at the corner of his vision. He turned, flashlight shaking, and found the hallway empty, but the chill remained, settling in his chest like ice. Objects around the room subtly shifted. A chair moved slightly closer, a picture frame tilted on the wall, though he had left everything perfectly aligned. Terrified, yet unable to leave, Alex tried to calm himself, thinking he might be imagining it. But the whispers continued, now mixed with a faint laughter, almost childlike, yet sinister. The sound seemed to drift from the walls, the ceiling, and the floor simultaneously. Something was in the house, watching, waiting for him to slip. In the middle of the night, Alex swore he saw a figure standing at the top of the staircase. A woman, pale and transparent, her eyes hollow, and a cold, mournful expression that froze him in place. By dawn, Alex fled, leaving all equipment behind, vowing never to return. Neighbors later reported hearing his frantic shouts coming from the house, though when they arrived, he had vanished down the lane, leaving the Morgan house silent once more, holding its dark secrets. Next, we uncover the first evidence left behind by the Morgans themselves. A diary with warnings no one understood. Chapter 3. The Diary of Shadows. After Alex's terrifying night, the Morgan house returned to its haunting silence, but curiosity drew others to its threshold. Among the few brave enough was Emma Clark, a historian fascinated by local legends. She had heard whispers of the family's mysterious disappearance and believed the key to the truth lay in the objects left behind. Her focus quickly turned to the diary, a leather-bound journal perched on the mantel, its pages yellowed and brittle. The diary belonged to Lillian Morgan, the matriarch. Her handwriting was meticulous at first, detailing mundane family life, breakfast routines, children's lessons, and late-night readings by the fireplace. But as Emma read further, the entries shifted. They became fragmented, filled with cryptic warnings and growing dread. Phrases like, "They watch us from the walls," and "Do not trust the laughter," appeared repeatedly. On the final pages, the entries devolved into frantic scrawls. "We cannot leave. They are in the house. The walls breathe. Pray for us." Emma felt a shiver crawl up her spine. The diary seemed alive, almost communicating a sense of urgency she couldn't ignore. She traced her fingers over sketches of shadowy figures, each more grotesque than the last, and symbols she couldn't decipher. There was a pattern, though she couldn't grasp it fully, some warning, a map of fear embedded in every line. The air in the room grew colder, and faint whispers, reminiscent of Alex's experience, tickled her ears. Later that night, Emma noticed subtle movements around her. Chairs tilted, curtains swayed without wind, and distant footsteps echoed across empty floors. She realized with growing horror that the diary might not just be a record, it could be a warning. Lillian's words were not merely reflections, they were a desperate attempt to preserve the family's sanity, and perhaps their lives. Emma's flashlight flickered, and for a split second she saw a shadow by the fireplace, too dark to be her own. Despite her fear, Emma photographed the diary and took notes, determined to decode its messages. The house seemed to hum around her, as if aware that she was uncovering its secrets. Every whisper, every chill, every shifting shadow reinforced one undeniable truth. The Morgan family had been trapped in something ancient and malicious, something that didn't want to let them go, or allow anyone else in. Next, we discover the hidden room beneath the staircase, a place no one had entered for decades, and the horrors it concealed. Chapter 4. The Hidden Room. Beneath the staircase in the Morgan house, a shadowed doorway had gone unnoticed for decades, concealed behind a warped wooden panel. Locals whispered that the family never used it, that it led somewhere forbidden, though no one knew why. Emma Clark, now obsessed with the house's secrets, found it one evening while inspecting the living room. The panel gave way with a reluctant creak, revealing a narrow stairwell that descended into darkness. Her flashlight barely pierced the gloom as she descended, each step echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The air smelled of damp decay and something heavier, almost like iron, curling in her throat. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a small stone-lined chamber. Dust hung in the air, thick and tangible, and the walls were scrawled with symbols similar to those in Lillian Morgan's diary. Candles, long burned out, were still arranged in a circle on the floor, blackened wax pooled beneath them as though ritual had frozen in time. In the far corner, a chest sat undisturbed for decades. Emma's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing objects that made her stomach twist. Old photographs of the family, their faces frozen in smiles that didn't reach their eyes, letters written in hurried, panicked handwriting, and personal items, a child's toy, a pocket watch, and a locket containing a strand of hair. Each item seemed charged, imbued with the energy of memories and fear, whispering secrets Emma couldn't yet comprehend. As she examined the room, the temperature plummeted further. A shadow moved along the wall, not quite human, with edges that flickered like smoke. Emma felt eyes on her, though no one stood there. Then came the whispers, low, urgent, overlapping. Words she could barely make out. You should not be here. They do not sleep. They watch. The voices rose and fell, a chilling rhythm echoing from every corner of the chamber. Emma realized with a mix of awe and terror that this hidden room had been the family's prison and sanctuary, a place where they hid, wrote their warnings, and tried to survive the incomprehensible force that haunted their home. The house wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding on fear, aware of every movement, every heartbeat of those who dared enter. Next, we discover the first night of a supernatural encounter, when the house revealed its most terrifying presence to Emma. Chapter 5. The First Encounter. Emma Clark had spent countless hours in the Morgan house, studying the diary, photographing the hidden room, and piecing together fragments of the family's terrifying final days. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the moment when the house decided she had lingered too long. It began as a low hum, almost imperceptible, vibrating through the floorboards beneath her feet. The candlelight flickered despite the absence of wind, casting distorted shadows across the walls. Emma froze, heart hammering, as the temperature plunged further. A cold so unnatural it seemed to wrap around her like a living thing. Then she heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps descending the staircase from above, slow and deliberate, though she was alone. Her flashlight trembled in her hands as she swept it across the living room. There, standing at the top of the stairs, was a figure, pale, almost translucent, draped in tattered clothing that seemed to flutter in a windless room. The eyes were hollow, black voids that bore into her, filled with anguish and something far older, far darker. Emma tried to speak, but no words came. The figure tilted its head, as if studying her, and then vanished, melting into the shadows like smoke, leaving behind a silence so thick it was suffocating. Shaken, Emma descended into the hidden room again, seeking some anchor of safety. But the whispers followed her, fragmented, urgent, echoing from the walls. You should not be here. They are awake. They remember. Each word was a cold gust against her skin, a warning she could not ignore. Objects shifted subtly around her. The locket slid across the floor, the photographs seemed to glare, and the diary trembled in her hands. It was as if the house itself were alive, aware of her every thought. Emma realized with a sinking dread that the Morgans' warnings had been understated. The house didn't just hold memories, it held presence. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, every shadow that danced just beyond her vision was a signal, a reminder that the house was watching, patient, and perhaps hungry for more than just attention. Her instincts screamed at her to flee, yet some part of her knew she could not leave without understanding the truth. The Morgan house had chosen her as its witness, and it would reveal its secrets, whether she wanted them or not. Next, we discover the truth behind the Morgan family's disappearance, and the ritual they tried to escape.
Chapter 6. The ritual that bound them. The diary had hinted at it, but only in fragmented sentences and frantic sketches. The Morgans were not just victims of the house, they had been trying to contain something far older, far darker. As Emma studied the pages more carefully, she uncovered references to a ritual, a desperate attempt to protect themselves from a presence that had grown too powerful to ignore. Lillian Morgan had written about strange symbols etched into the floor, walls, and even the furniture, a network of protective wards meant to trap whatever entity had taken hold of their home. Candles burned in precise formations, chants were whispered in the dead of night, and family members maintained a strict vigil, each taking turns to ward off the unseen force. But over time, fatigue and fear had eroded their defenses. The words on the final pages were almost incoherent. It grows. We cannot escape. We are bound to it. Emma traced the diagrams in the diary against the hidden room. The patterns in the stone floor, the charred candle circles, and the symbols on the walls matched Lillian's sketches perfectly. It was clear the Morgans had been conducting a ritual of containment, and something had been bound, but not entirely. That lingering force, whatever it was, had remained in the house, patient, watching, waiting. That night, as Emma lingered in the hidden room, the air shifted again. The whispers returned, louder and more distinct. They failed. It waits. You cannot leave. The temperature dropped sharply, frost forming along the edges of the stone floor. Shadows began to crawl along the walls, thickening, stretching, almost tangible. Emma's flashlight flickered violently, as if resisting the darkness, illuminating shapes she could not fully comprehend. Then she heard it, a low, guttural voice emanating from the shadows, words dripping with malice. "Relia, see us, or join us." Emma staggered back, heart racing, realizing with chilling clarity that the house was more than haunted. It was a vessel, a living prison, and the Morgans had become its unwilling wardens. Any who entered now were at risk of becoming part of its eternal cycle. Next, we follow Emma as she attempts to decipher the last pages of Lillian's diary, and discovers a warning that chills her to the bone. Chapter 7. The Final Warning. Emma Clark had read countless passages from Lillian Morgan's diary, but the final entries were different. Desperate, frantic, almost living. The handwriting was jagged as if written in a panic, and the words seemed to shift on the page when she blinked. The last sentences were a warning that struck her with icy clarity. Do not linger. Do not listen. They remember every step you take. The house is hungry and it feeds on curiosity. If you stay, you will become part of it. Forever. As she traced the words with trembling fingers, the room seemed to respond. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the walls, pooling like dark water at the baseboards. The air turned thick, pressing against her chest, each breath a labor. Somewhere above, the floorboards groaned under the weight of footsteps that weren't hers. The temperature dropped further, frost forming along the edges of the diary, as if the house itself was trying to warn her. Or perhaps claim her. Determined to understand, Emma compared the final warnings to the symbols in the hidden room. She realized that the family's ritual had not been completed, leaving the entity partially unbound. Their fear, their failure, had tethered the malevolent force to the house itself, and now, decades later, Emma's presence had reactivated it. Suddenly, the whispers intensified, overlapping in a cacophony of voices. You cannot leave. You are ours. Forever. Emma stumbled back toward the staircase, clutching the diary, and caught a glimpse of movement, shadows twisting into human shapes, faces appearing where no one should have been, eyes hollow and staring directly at her. Her mind raced. Was this the Morgans? Or something older, something far more sinister? Realizing the danger, Emma tried to escape, but the house seemed to shift around her, corridors elongating, staircases bending. Every exit she tried, Ed led her deeper inside. The final warning of the diary echoed in her mind. It was not just a record, it was a living plea, a message meant to protect anyone brave, or foolish, enough to enter. The house wanted her to know that curiosity came with a cost. Next, we witness Emma's first confrontation with the entity, the shadow that lurks at the heart of the Morgan house. Chapter 8. The Shadow at the Heart. Emma Clark's heart pounded as she navigated the twisting corridors of the Morgan house. Every step felt wrong, as if the floor itself was alive, shifting beneath her. The whispers from the diary had become a roar in her mind. You cannot leave. You are ours. forever. Suddenly, in the dim glow of her flashlight, she saw it. A shadow, taller than any human, pooling in the corner of the living room. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, stretching and contracting as though testing its boundaries, watching her every motion. The air around her thickened, heavy with an unseen presence. Emma could feel it pressing against her, a weight that made her knees buckle. The shadow's edges were indistinct, writhing like smoke, but within its form, she thought she saw faces, countless, agonized, twisting in silent screams. It was the accumulation of decades, trapped inside the walls, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. And now, it had noticed her. Emma's instincts screamed at her to run, yet her feet refused to move. The entity surged closer, and she realized that it wasn't just a force of malice. It was sentient, aware of her thoughts, her intentions, her panic. The diary's warnings echoed again. The house didn't just haunt, it claimed. Its power was rooted in the fear of those who dared enter. Suddenly the shadow lunged, stretching across the floor like liquid darkness. Emma slammed herself against the wall, gasping for air. Her flashlight flickered, illuminating the hidden room's symbols etched in the floor and walls, the remnants of the ritual meant to contain this very entity. She realized that the Morgans' efforts had only partially succeeded, leaving the house a prison for something far beyond comprehension. As Emma struggled to maintain control, the entity seemed to hesitate, almost curious. It didn't attack outright, but its presence was suffocating, a warning and a test. The house itself seemed to pulse with its power, shadows creeping along the ceilings and walls, whispering words she couldn't decipher. Emma knew one thing with absolute clarity. If she misstepped, if she lingered too long, she could become part of the house forever. Next, we discover the hidden secrets in the basement, a place the Morgans feared most and never dared to enter. Chapter 9. The Basement of Secrets. Emma Clark's flashlight trembled as she approached the basement door. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to turn back, but curiosity and the weight of the diary's warnings pushed her forward. The doorknob was icy to the touch, and as she twisted it, a groan echoed from the hinges, deep and resonant, like the house itself warning her. The basement steps descended into darkness, a suffocating black that seemed to swallow the light. The air grew thicker with every step, carrying the scent of damp earth and decay. Emma's breath formed small clouds, condensing in the unnatural cold. The basement was larger than she expected, with walls lined by shelves covered in dust and forgotten objects. At the far end, a heavy iron door loomed, its surface scratched with deep, jagged marks, the symbol of a desperate struggle. Emma felt a chill crawl up her spine. The Morgans had clearly feared this place more than any other. She pushed the door open, revealing a room frozen in time. In the center lay a circle of ash and melted wax, remnants of the family's most intense ritual. Scattered around it were personal items, the Morgans' journals, toys, and photographs. But each one was marred, smeared with dark stains that seemed almost alive. Symbols identical to those in the diary covered the walls and floor, some glowing faintly in the dim light, as if reacting to her presence. Then she saw it. A small, weathered chest tucked in the corner, bound with iron chains. Her hands shook as she opened it, revealing objects of a sinister nature, fragments of ritual tools, remnants of herbs, and a small vial containing an unknown black liquid. Each item radiated an oppressive energy, whispering warnings in voices that made her head throb. Emma realized that this basement had been the heart of the Morgan struggle, the epicenter of the house's power, and the very reason the family never left. As she stepped back, the shadows around her shifted, forming human-like shapes that murmured unintelligible words. The house's presence was undeniable here. It pulsed with malice and memory, feeding on her fear. Emma understood that if she lingered too long, she could become the next warning left behind. Another soul trapped in the Morgan house, bound by curiosity and terror. Next, we witness Emma's attempt to leave the basement, only to find the house itself resisting her escape.
Did you know? One of the most famous haunted houses in American history is the Whaley House in San Diego, California. Built in the 1850s by Thomas Whaley, this home stands on the site of an execution ground where a man named James Yankee Jim Robinson was hanged, a fact documented by historians and the house's official records. Because of this, visitors and paranormal researchers have claimed for decades that the Whaley House is haunted not just by Whaley's family, but by the very spirit of Yankee Jim himself, whose heavy footsteps are still reportedly heard echoing through the halls. The house has been preserved as a historic site and is officially recognized as one of the US's most haunted houses, where guests are invited on tours to listen for unexplained sounds and sightings, a fascinating blend of real history and ghostly lore.
Chapter 10. Trapped by the House. Emma Clark had uncovered the basement's secrets, but leaving proved far more terrifying than entering. As she climbed the steps, the iron door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang. Her flashlight flickered violently, and the walls of the stairwell seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, narrowing her path. Panic surged through her veins. The house was no longer just a structure. It had become a living trap, actively resisting her escape. The whispers followed her, twisting into voices of the Morgan family, overlapping and pleading. "Do not leave. Stay. Join us." The shadows elongated, snaking along the walls like black tendrils, curling around her feet, trying to impede her progress. Every hallway she turned into looped back upon itself. Rooms she remembered now appeared different. Angles warped, doors led to unfamiliar spaces, and the staircase seemed endless. The house was mocking her, turning curiosity into terror. Emma's heartbeat thundered as she ran blindly, skidding across the creaking floorboards. Her flashlight caught glimpses of figures in the corners, tall, faceless, twisted shadows that mirrored her every movement. She realized she was not merely trapped physically. The house had ensnared her mind, bending her perception of reality. The Morgans' warnings in the diary were no exaggeration. This place fed on the psyche of anyone who entered. Desperate, Emma tried to retrace her steps to the hidden room, hoping to use the protective symbols. But each turn seemed to place her further inside the labyrinthine house. The shadows pressed closer, whispering incomprehensible threats and distorted pleas. Her hands shook as she clutched the diary. It felt like her only tether to reality, the last connection to the family who had suffered here. She realized then that leaving was no longer just a matter of opening door. It would require outsmarting the house itself. Next, we follow Emma as she discovers a secret passage, the only possible way to escape the house's grip.
Chapter 11. The Secret Passage. Emma Clark's panic reached a fever pitch as the hallways twisted around her, each turn deeper into the Morgan house's dark heart. But then, in a moment of desperate clarity, she noticed something peculiar, a faint draught seeping through a crack in the wall near the kitchen. Her hand traced the edges of the panel, and with a shuddering push, it gave way, revealing a narrow, hidden passage. This was the house's secret, a path the Morgans may have used in their own attempts to survive. The passage was tight, dark and suffocating, lined with rough wooden planks. Each step echoed ominously, as if the house itself was aware of her movements. Shadows pressed against the walls, creeping closer with every heartbeat. The whispers returned, now urgent and desperate, overlapping in voices she almost recognized. The Morgans, trapped souls warning her, "Do not linger. The darkness waits." Emma pressed on, inching forward, flashlight shaking. The air grew colder, more oppressive, as if the passage was a living corridor, testing her resolve. Objects on the floor seemed to move subtly when she wasn't looking. Tiny toys, scraps of paper, even the locket she had found in the hidden room now lying at her feet. The house was trying to slow her, feeding on fear, dragging her deeper into its labyrinthine heart. At the passage's end, she glimpsed a faint light, the promise of the outside world. But as she sprinted toward it, a massive shadow shot across the walls, taller than any human, blocking her path. The entity had followed her, relentless, its presence pressing so heavily she could barely breathe. Yet Emma refused to falter. She remembered the diary's final instructions about protective symbols and the power of awareness over fear. Heart pounding, she whispered a plea, feeling her resolve stiffen. She would not become another victim of this house. With one final surge, Emma passed the shadow, feeling the oppressive weight lift slightly. She emerged into a small room she hadn't seen before, dust motes dancing in the faint light, but the air lighter, the whispers receding. She realized she had survived the first trial of the Morgan house, but the ordeal was far from over. Next, we uncover the first signs that the house is not done with her, and that the shadows are far more cunning than she imagined. Chapter 12. The House Fights Back. Emma Clark thought reaching the small room beyond the secret passage would offer relief, but the Morgan house had other plans. The faint light she had glimpsed flickered, shadows curling around her like living tendrils. Doors slammed shut in the distance, heavy and deliberate, while the whispers grew sharper, more urgent, almost mocking. "You cannot leave. You belong here." The house was no longer just haunted. It was aware, calculating, testing her every move. Emma's heart raced as she tried to steady her breathing. Every hallway seemed to twist impossibly, corridors elongating and narrowing like the house itself was a maze of malice. Objects she had left behind, the locket, the diary, now appeared in different places, as if the house was following her, tracking her path. The shadows weren't static. They moved with intelligence, slipping along walls, stretching into corners, blocking exits. Then she noticed something more sinister, faint impressions in the dust. Footprints that weren't hers, leading her deeper into the home, guiding her like a predator luring prey. Emma realized with horror that the house wasn't just a setting. It was an entity, responding to her fear, reacting to her curiosity, and learning from her every action. The Morgans' warnings weren't exaggerations. This place had a mind, and it was determined to keep its secrets. As she advanced, a figure emerged from the shadows, pale, faceless, flickering like a candle flame. It didn't rush her, but it watched, every movement calculated, every blink deliberate. Emma understood that escaping the Morgan house wasn't about speed, it was about comprehension, understanding its rules, its patterns, and the invisible chains that bound both the living and the lost souls within. With the diary clutched tightly, she whispered aloud, reciting the fragments of protective wards Lillian had left behind. The figure recoiled slightly, the shadows hesitating, as though recognition of the ritual weakened the house's hold. But the battle was far from over. Emma had survived, but the Morgan house would continue testing her, with cunning, patience, and an intelligence honed by decades of fear and suffering. Next, we witness Emma discovering the secret of the attic, the place where the house's power was strongest and the Morgans' final stand had been made. Chapter 13. The Attic of Power. Emma Clark's ascent up the narrow staircase leading to the attic felt heavier than any physical weight. Each step groaned beneath her, the walls pressing inward as if the house itself were testing her resolve. The air grew colder with every step, carrying whispers that were sharper now, urgent, angry, almost commanding. She clutched the diary tightly, its pages worn from her frantic reading, hoping that the words of Lillian Morgan could guide her through the house's most dangerous domain. The attic door was massive and warped, etched with symbols she had only seen faintly in the hidden room and basement. As she pushed it open, a gust of frigid air nearly knocked her off balance. Inside, the room stretched unnaturally, its ceiling high and shadowed, with beams that seemed to twist like gnarled fingers. At the center lay a circle of charred wood, ashes, and remnants of candles, the heart of the Morgan ritual. The walls were covered in the same cryptic symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness, pulsating as if alive. Emma felt the presence before she saw it, the shadow, taller and more defined than ever, coalescing near the ritual circle. Its form flickered like smoke, but radiated a weight that pressed on her chest. For the first time she sensed its intent. It wasn't just aware of her. It was aware of its own power, the energy trapped within the house, and the legacy of the Morgan struggle. The house was strongest here, where the family had fought to contain it, and it resented her intrusion. She stepped cautiously, reciting fragments of the protective wards, feeling the shadows flinch. The air vibrated with a low, oppressive hum, a chorus of voices crying out in anger and pain. Emma realized the ritual circle was more than protection. It was a keystone, a locus of power that anchored the entity, allowing the house to exist as it did. But any mistake here could be fatal. One misstep could bind her soul to the walls forever. As the shadow advanced, Emma held her ground, determined to reach the far side of the attic. Every pulse of light from her flashlight revealed fleeting faces in the darkness. The Morgans, trapped, watching, warning. Their final stand had failed, but perhaps her courage and understanding could tip the balance. The house had tested countless souls, but few had confronted its source. Tonight, Emma might be the first to truly see what lay at the heart of the Morgan house. Next, we witness Emma confronting the entity directly, face to face with the force that has haunted generations. Chapter 14. Face to face with darkness. Emma Clark stood in the center of the attic, heart pounding, every nerve screaming in protest. The shadows had coalesced into a figure taller than any human, its edges flickering like smoke, yet solid enough to command the space. For the first time, she could see a faint semblance of a face, hollow eyes, stretched features, and a mouth twisted in eternal anguish. This was the presence the Morgans had tried to contain, the force that had claimed decades of fear and suffering. It moved slowly toward her, each step deliberate, the floor beneath it unnervingly silent. Emma could feel its intelligence. It was aware of her fear, her intentions, her every heartbeat. The whispers escalated into voices, layered and chaotic. "Join us. Remain. Stay." They reverberated through the attic, pressing against her mind like a tide of ice. She knew she could not show weakness, or the house would claim her as it had claimed the Morgans. Emma clutched the diary tighter, her fingers tracing the protective symbols. She began to recite them aloud, her voice trembling but firm. The shadow paused, as if recognizing the words, the air around it pulsing with resistance. Light flickered from the candles, illuminating the symbols on the walls, each one a fragment of the ritual that had failed generations before. Emma realized the key wasn't confrontation. It was understanding, using the knowledge left by the family to navigate the house's power. The entity surged closer, black smoke stretching into tendrils that threatened to wrap around her. Emma steadied her voice, reciting every word, every warning she had gleaned from Lillian Morgan's diary. Slowly, the tendrils hesitated, recoiling slightly, as if respecting the boundaries she imposed. She felt a fleeting connection, the house responding, acknowledging her courage and comprehension. The shadow flickers, red, contorting in frustration, yet the air became less suffocating. For the first time, Emma sensed control, however fragile, over the darkness that had dominated this home for decades. Her pulse still raced, but the entity lingered at the edge of the room, constrained by the protective wards and the knowledge she carried. The Morgans had left their warnings for a reason, and Emma now understood them. The house was not invincible, but it was patient, cunning, and aware. Tonight, she had survived face to face with the darkness at its heart. Next, we uncover the aftermath of Emma's confrontation, how the house responds to her defiance, and the first hints that she may not be entirely free. Chapter 15. The House's Revenge. Emma Clark believed that confronting the shadow in the attic had given her some measure of control, but the Morgan house was far from finished. The moment she descended the stairs, she realized the house had changed its strategy. Hallways that had once been familiar now twisted impossibly. Doorways led to rooms she had never seen before. It was subtle, almost intelligent. The house wasn't attacking her outright, but it was manipulating her reality, turning curiosity into confusion and fear. The whispers had shifted in tone. They were no longer frantic warnings, but taunting, playful in a sinister way. "You think you can escape? You are ours." The voices echoed off the walls, bouncing unpredictably, making it impossible to determine their origin. Emma stumbled over a pile of fallen debris, her pulse racing, Every object she touched seemed to resist her, sliding slightly from her grip or disappearing when she looked away. The house was reacting, testing her again, reminding her that survival depended on constant vigilance. As she moved toward what she hoped was the front door, she noticed the shadows forming patterns on the walls, faint silhouettes that replayed scenes of the Morgan family's last days, children screaming, doors slamming, Lillian scribbling frantic warnings in the diary. Emma's stomach churned. The house was not just preserving memories, it was recreating them, dragging the past into the present as a reminder of its power. Yet amid the chaos, Emma noticed something else. Small flickers of resistance in the symbols she had recited in the attic. The protective wards seemed to slow the house, giving her slight pauses, windows she hadn't seen before, doors that opened when she needed them. Survival, she realized, was a matter of balance, understanding the rules the house had enforced for decades and navigating them without faltering. Her mind raced with the realization that even if she escaped physically, the house had left an imprint on her, whispers that would follow her, shadows that might linger in dreams, and a chilling awareness that the Morgan house did not easily release those who entered. Escape was possible, but the house never truly let go. Next, we follow Emma as she discovers a hidden exit, one that might finally lead her out, but not without a final test.
Chapter 16. The final trial. Emma Clark had navigated the basement, hidden rooms, secret passage, and attic, yet the Morgan house had one final test. In a hallway that stretched impossibly long, she noticed a faint door, half hidden behind a crumbling wall. The whispers had intensified, overlapping into a chorus that almost blinded her mind with fear. "Do you think you can leave? Do you think we will let you go?" Each word reverberated through her chest, but Emma's resolve hardened. She had come too far to falter now. The door led to a narrow corridor lined with mirrors, but the reflections weren't hers. In each pane she saw distorted versions of herself, some screaming silently, others bound or trapped, whispering desperate warnings. It was the house's ultimate test, a confrontation with fear itself. Each step Emma took sent ripples through the reflections, and she realized that the shadows she had encountered were connected to these mirrored projections. One misstep, one glance too long, and she could join the endless gallery of the lost. Drawing on everything she had learned from Lillian Morgan's diary, Emma focused on the symbols, chanting softly under her breath. The mirrored figures trembled and flickered, some vanishing entirely, as if recognizing the boundaries of the protective wards. The house fought back, contorting the walls, stretching the corridor and trying to disorient her, but Emma pressed forward, heart racing, eyes fixed on the faint light at the corridor's end. As she reached the final door, the air felt suffocating. The shadows surged one last time, coiling around her like tendrils of darkness. Emma pushed through the terror, whispering the final ward from memory, and the house seemed to shudder. The shadows hesitated, then recoiled, retreating into the walls with low, distorted moans. Emma threw the door open and stumbled into the cool night air, the oppressive presence lifting just enough to let her breathe freely for the first time in hours. But even as she escaped, Emma knew the Morgan house was not defeated. It had tested her, it had marked her, and it would always remember the soul that dared to defy its darkness. Next, we uncover the chilling aftermath, the lingering presence that follows Emma beyond the Morgan house. Chapter 17. Beyond the Morgan house. Emma Clark emerged from the Morgan house into the still night, her body trembling, lungs burning, and mind reeling from the horrors she had witnessed. The air outside was crisp, yet it carried an eerie familiarity, the faint echo of whispers and distant footsteps that reminded her the house had not released its claim entirely. She had survived the entity, navigated the labyrinthine corridors, and outsmarted the shadows, but a shiver ran down her spine. The Morgan house never truly lets go. Days after her escape, Emma noticed subtle signs that the house's presence had followed her. At home, she would catch glimpses of shadows flickering in corners. Objects moved slightly when she wasn't looking. Sometimes at night, she heard a faint whisper, "We remember. We wait." It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably there. a reminder that the house's hunger was patient and intelligent. The Morgans' legacy of fear had extended beyond the walls of the home, embedding itself in those who dared enter. Emma documented everything, ensuring the diary and her experiences were preserved. She shared warnings and observations, urging anyone who dared approach the Morgan house to understand the stakes. Curiosity, she realized, was both a tool and a trap. The house was alive, and it thrived on those who sought to uncover its secrets. Every step she had taken, every symbol she had recited, had been part of a delicate balance. One misstep could have bound her to the shadows forever. And yet, she survived. But the victory was fragile. Emma now understood the true nature of the house, a guardian of secrets, a vessel of malice, and a keeper of the lost. Though she had escaped, the story would follow her for the rest of her life. The Morgan house remained silent, patient, and waiting for the next soul curious enough or foolish enough to enter its walls. Emma looked back one final time from a safe distance as the silhouette of the house loomed in the moonlight. Its secrets were intact, its power undiminished, and its whispers promised that it would endure, waiting, watching, feeding on fear. The Morgan house had tested her courage, her mind, and her will to survive. She had passed, but only just, and she knew one truth above all. Some houses are not merely haunted, they are eternal. The end.